Hey readers, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Paloma, and today's video is going to be my review of Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick by Zora Neale Hurston. So let's get started. So I mentioned this book before in my books to read for 2025, and I'm so glad that I stuck through with it and I've read the book. A little backstory on the book itself is that it's a collection of short stories that were deemed lost and were found in periodicals and archives from Zora Neale Hurston. What makes it so great is if you're not really familiar with Zora Neale Hurston's work, especially with her most famous book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, I think this is a great beginner book to start with. This is technically the first book I've read of Zora Neale Hurston, and now it makes me more excited to read her other books because now I get a feel for her writing style and kind of what she's trying to say through her work, and I really enjoyed it. Because it's a book of short stories, there's not much I can really say about character depth and things like that, but I will say that if you do love short stories, I personally would recommend this. So a lot of the short stories take place in Florida, specifically probably mid-Florida, maybe a little bit further up. I live in South Florida, so a lot of the cities that she mentions I actually have never been to and or have heard of. And then, of course, there's a couple short stories that are centered in Harlem. And then there's actually possibly one or two that actually have no setting at all. So out of the 21 short stories, I have 9 personal favorites that even if you don't pick up the book, if you are able to get a PDF version or even probably borrow it from the library or read about it online, these are the ones that I would recommend. The first one I'm going to recommend is actually the first short story in the book, and it is John Redding Goes to Sea. I think it's a very powerful start to the book. It actually broke my heart reading the last few paragraphs because, and I don't want to spoil it, especially if you decide to read the book, but John Redding talks about traveling and wanting to see what else the world has to offer, and his parents are kind of just like, no, you need to stay here and help us, and that has a consequence in itself. And I think it really speaks to, you know, even if the people around you are telling you no, to really still follow your dreams no matter what, or life will take a hold of you and guide you into a different direction. My next favorite is The Magnolia Flower. I love The Magnolia Flower because it was told from the perspective of a stream and a brook. I thought that was very lovely. I think sometimes we should let nature talk for us. I think a lot of the trees and nature itself has a lot to say, even though it can't really speak in the language that we speak. It kind of tells us when things are rough and when things are good. And so for the brook and the stream to tell this story of these people that come in and kind of live on their land and what happens, I think was very nice, and I thought it was very touching. I thought it was very lovely, and there's a scene at the end where 2 of the main characters actually come back to the brook and the stream and they say, you know, doesn't it look like they're laughing? You know, I thought it was very sweet and I thought it was very lovely. So because I had mentioned this in my books to read in 2025, I do remember mentioning in that video that I had a hard time with the language of the book. Because I've pushed through and I went and I finished the book, the language is honestly not that bad. I think you have to be comfortable with reading colloquial writing, especially if it's from an era of time where there's obviously 2 distinct ways of speaking, which was African Americans, the way they spoke, versus white Americans and the way they spoke. There's kind of a topic of what is considered the correct way to speak, and obviously the characters in her book from the time period that she's in, not many of them are educated, so they don't know what this correct speak is, or, you know, that's just the way they grew up speaking, because, you know, language is a very interesting thing, and I don't want to say it's something I'm interested in because there's a lot to language, whether it's written or verbal, but in this case, in this book, the Black characters do speak in a kind of African American vernacular, whereas when she does input a white character, they kind of speak very formal, as if, you know, the white speak, so to say. So I thought that was really great. I thought it was very authentic, I'm very glad that I stuck through with it, because when I first tried to read it, I was like, this is so hard for me because I was so used to reading kind of the European writing style. So after a couple years of kind of reading Black classic authors, which I could do a video on that, on Black authors that I consider part of the classical genre, it made for an easier reading. So I do want to say, if you decide to pick up this book and you're not really familiar with colloquial speak, I would try and kind of read maybe James Baldwin or Richard Wright and kind of get a feel for that before you get to this one. But that's just my opinion. I feel like I didn't have much to say about this book because I don't really read short stories, especially a collection of short stories. If you can see it in my library behind me, I do have a Miami Noir short story collection, as well as the Penguin Classics Korean short stories. So it does seem like I'm trying to get back into reading short stories, because I do want to challenge myself and not be so rigid with the way that I read. I kind of want to expand it a little bit, you know, because the last few years, as I've gotten back into reading, I've kind of just been like, I want to read this type of book this way and whatever. And I don't think that's really a good way to read books, because, you know, art is art, whether it's good or bad. Somebody had something to say and it should be taken as is. And I think with expanding your literary kind of world, you do have to get comfortable with reading different kinds of writing styles, and maybe somewhere along the way that actually becomes your favorite writing style. Because for the very longest time, I hated first-person novels. I thought they were really weird, and I'd be like, well, I didn't do that. But then it's kind of like, you know, when you write in your diary, you go, I went to the store today, and if somebody read your diary, they'd be like, well, I didn't do that. So now that I'm a little bit older and I can kind of see it as it is, as a writing style, versus kind of comprehending it as that way, I think I have a better time reading first-person narratives. But again, the story has to be compelling enough, So this video was one of my shorter review videos, but I do think Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick is a really great book. I would recommend it, to be honest, and I would give it 4 stars. Honestly, I would give this 4 stars. The last few reviews, I've given every book 4 stars. This one really deserves it, especially for John Reading Goes to Sea. I mean, that's a short story that'll probably stick with me for a while. And so if you do pick up this book, please let me know and let me know your thoughts. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye. Also, this is unrelated to the review video. I started watching The Pit on HBO Max. I'm kind of obsessed. So if anyone knows any kind of books that are kind of in that same vein, please let me know, or I'm about to take out my writing kit and write my own medical novel. Oh no, I have no medical experience. You know what? I'm gonna let actual medical professionals write that book. I'll let them have it.